you can't pinpoint just one thing, but it's been very cool to see all of the research come out and start to identify all of these different things that put this puzzle together of why the turkeys are declining.
What is up, everybody? Mark on the mic here, joined by Mr. Sam Soholt. Across from me, virtually, we're going to be talking today about a topic, a handful of topics that I know are near and dear to both of our hearts, and that's wild turkey conservation. Recognizing that we're seeing some declines in certain areas, evaluating and looking into the why behind that, and some things that we as sportsmen can do to combat that. And one of those things is going to be predator management. So that's not the only thing affecting wild turkeys, but we're definitely going to speak that today. But Sam, welcome. It's good to see you. It's been a minute.
It has been a minute. Good to be back on.
Yeah, for sure, man. I noticed I commented before the show that I think it was maybe subconscious. We're both wearing black on black shirt, black hat. It's almost like we're in mourning of some of these wild turkey population declines. So very appropriate.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's been a little bit of doom and gloom, these last few years as more research has come out. So yeah, I think the black on black was very fitting.
But cool, man. So, jumping right in here. Well, actually, since it's been a minute, let's give me a little, what's up, man? Let's do that. I'm trying to cut to the chase here, but what's shaking? What have you been up to?
I thought that I couldn't travel any more than I had in the past. And then my wife started doing travel occupational therapy, which has been awesome. But we bought a house in North Dakota and have been renting that. We bought a house so we could be more nomadic, if that makes any sense. So we have that up on short-term rental, Airbnb, Furnished Finder, VRBO, and then she has been doing travel occupational therapy. So she did her first rotation in Idaho. We were out there for 4 months, and then she took a month off, and then we've been in St. Joseph, Missouri the last few months. We're here till the end of February, and then but yeah, between her traveling and then me traveling for work and then us traveling for adventure, I have been, if there's a road out there, we've driven it.
I believe it. That's cool, man, though. You definitely get to see a good part of the country and really not just visit, probably kind of immerse yourself into these, microcultures that, you see across the United States. So that's neat.
Yeah, it's been very cool. And then other than that, just, shooting a lot of photos and talking a lot of conservation, and thanks in part to you guys raising lots of money for conservation. And it's been a really good, I don't know when the last podcast we did together, but since then, it's been a good one. Awesome,
man. Awesome. Well, speaking of conservation, now we can jump up. We got the formalities out of the way. We can jump right in. So let's talk a little turkey. I mean, I think to me, like, the turkey conservation success story is like one of the greatest ever told, right? I mean, we went from, like I said, I'll use my point of reference. I grew up in Washington State. There was a time that turkeys weren't even a thing, and then they became this, wow, we have turkeys, this mysterious thing where, if you knew somebody that killed a turkey, it was a big deal. How'd you do it? Where'd you find them? And then it went to they're everywhere, and it's like, congratulations, we did it, everybody. In fact, to probably some people, like even a nuisance, right? Like, oh, we got too many of these darn things. And now in some areas, though, we're starting to see this dip. And so maybe let's talk, and you can probably speak to that trend more than I can, but what's going on there?
So it's certainly a combo of factors, right? And like you said, we had this giant boom, and a lot of that came from when they were trying to resurrect turkey populations. They were trapping and translocating turkeys all over the country, so they would put out a giant row of corn or whatever feed it was, and they'd wait for, a big pile of turkeys to be feeding on that. And then they would use basically jet nets and trap turkeys and then transport them. Because originally they were trying to transport eggs and then incubate them and then let go, poults. And they had all these different things that they were doing originally, but it wasn't until they actually started transporting like groups of turkeys that we started to see this population expansion. And like you said, I mean, I'm trying to remember what the low was on the number of turkeys, but the number you always heard when after this explosion was like from whatever it was, 30,000 or 50,000 turkeys, or whatever it was, to 7 million turkeys nationwide. So, I mean, 7 million turkeys, like, it's hard to even wrap your head around how many birds that really is. But like you said, they were everywhere. You had, farmers and ranchers complaining. I know one farmer buddy, like, they would eat down his feed pile by like a foot every winter, and he had whatever, 150, 200 turkeys. So, but yeah, we started to see this decline, and a lot of it started in the Southeast, which is really like the stronghold of like the turkey hunter, right? It's that's where, like, you have dyed in the wool turkey hunters. Those guys have been living through it and coming up in it. It's where all of like the, godfathers of the turkey, turkey world come from. But they're starting to see this dip, Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas. And they've started to figure out what the different factors are. And a lot of it is habitat. And so you have not only habitat loss, but you have changes in habitat and changes in prescribed fires, changes in logging tactics, changes in, you start to have a lot more broken habitat. And turkeys are fairly adaptive. I mean, you'll have people say like, oh, we got turkeys in town, like there's turkeys on the golf course, and yes, turkeys can survive, but in the wild, like, outside of cities, if you start to have more broken habitat, you have less areas for birds to nest properly. And then you have, more, it's easier for them to be subject of, predation and hard to find places to nest and or whatever. But so it's this really big combo, as well as hunting, like as turkey populations exploded, tag allocation went up, season structure changed. So you had these really long seasons. You can archery hunt early. You can then shotgun hunt for a long period of time. You can, in certain states, you could kill, 3 to 5 turkeys. And, in a lot of the research that's come out from people like Dr. Mike Chamberlain, and other people like that, they've started to figure out, okay, like, here's how the social structure works of the turkey. And if we kill dominant birds early in the season, it messes up the entire ladder of like the social structure. And so they have to restart that pecking order. And so you can't pinpoint just one thing, but it's been very cool to see all of the research come out and start to identify all of these different things that put this puzzle together of why the turkeys are declining.
For sure. Can you dive in a little bit deeper, if you can, on, that pecking order? Like, I feel like we use that term even just like in general vernacular, but I mean, that is something that is like a real thing with turkeys. And then also maybe some of the stuff you might know on like gobbling activity, as far as like hunter pressure and gobbling activity.
For sure. Yeah. So the pecking order. So a lot of times, you'll hear people start seeing strutting turkeys, way before the season, late February, March, like there'll start to be a lot of strutting activity. And what's happening is it's basically the leks or whatever, or the groups of turkeys are forming a pecking order. So it's figuring out which birds are the dominant gobbler in the area. And the dominant gobbler is going to be the one that's going to breed the most hens, because the dominant gobbler has the strongest, or at least, in their head, they've got the strongest DNA. So they're going to be able to breed more hens successfui. Well, what happens is if you shoot, say, a dominant bird, let's say you set out a strutter decoy, you go in and you are a good hunter and you kill a dominant bird early, rather than just the next bird on the totem pole, next bird on the ladder becoming the dominant bird, it completely messes it up, and they have to restart figuring out the pecking order. And so it delays the breeding. So that's a pretty major deal. So rather than, basically the dominant bird, breeding hens early, and so you have basically the nest drop all at the same time, you start to have staggered nest drops. And what that allows for is increased predation. So the pecking order is a big deal. And you've started to see changes. So a lot of places have started to push seasons back. I think Alabama and Tennessee pushed seasons back 2 weeks. Georgia may have done the same, but it's a way to allow a lot of these dominant birds to breed before the turkey season even kicks off. And then you asked about gobbling activity. And one of the biggest basically indicators of gobbling activity is hunting pressure. So as when there's no pressure in the woods, Chamberlain's group has done research where they put these microphones way up in the tree to collect gobbling activity. And what it has shown is that as increased pressure happens, basically gobbling activity goes way down. And that gobbling activity it's needed for the breeding, because then, birds are locating where they're going to be, where they're going to breed, and hens call back, and it's the whole social structure playing out in the woods right above you. And obviously there's nothing better than sitting in the woods and listening to that rolling thunder of, a whole bunch of birds up and down the ridge, like sounding off. But it's been pretty cool to see this research come out and figure out, okay, like how can we best, because it's a crossroads, right? So you want to have high hunter success, high hunter, like you want people to enjoy the hunt. But you need to find that perfect crossroad where the birds can do what they need to do. And so we can continue to have this experience in the future. So I think they've done a good job of, starting to work with state agencies on, okay, if we can push the season back, even a week or two, it's going to make a big difference in the breeding activity.
For sure. And one thing that you made me think of, and I guess I'll ask this in the form of a question, but I would imagine, some of these states that had these seasons that start, really early, where you might be, disrupting that pecking order with harvest. But I would have to think also you are losing time where if a hen, is successful in with a nest, or I said at least it's successful in creating one, but she loses it, it gives her more time to start another one too.
Right. Exactly. It gives her way more time to re-nest. Yep.
So yeah, I think that's super important. What's going on with even just weather patterns? I think that would probably have an impact on turkey nest production or success. What do you know there?
I guess I haven't looked into a whole lot of like the climate change, weather pattern change. I guess it kind of depends on where you are, right? Mm-hmm. If you have a mild winter, obviously more birds are going to make it through the winter, or as far as like, the first year birds. I guess I can't really speak to the weather pattern on that. I probably should have done a little more research on it.
Oh, no, I kind of probably surprised. It's just like something that like popped into my mind there, because I know you hear like, oh, we had a wet spring, and not necessarily attacking it from like a climate change perspective, but even just like a year to year, like we have variance in,
sure.
Springs and like harshness of winters. Like, we're in a pretty good cold snap right now, but like how long is that going to last? We're supposed to be in the 40s next week. Are the turkeys going to be fine? Like, just the stuff that rolls through my brain on a daily basis. But
yeah, no, that's a good point. And the big one on turkeys is hail. So
what?
if you have a big, if you have a good hatch even, and then like a big hailstorm rolls through in early June or whatever, when all of those poults have been born, in the Black Hills in South Dakota, they had 2 springs in a row where they had a major hailstorm in the middle of June, basically like prime, like all the poults have been born and they were just running around on the ground, and hailstorms came and absolutely knocked them down. So that can be a big factor.
Unbelievable. Yeah. And I guess that's probably like a regional thing, depending on the landscape. Maybe if I get a hailstorm, I guess potentially here in Wisconsin where you have more tree cover or something like that, I would assume less susceptible, but I don't know.
Yeah. It's, and then you don't want too wet of a spring, so you want it wet enough where there's going to be bugs and things that are hatching for these poults to be able to feed. But if you get too wet, it'll, basically drown them out. They're definitely susceptible to, they're a tough bird, but they're definitely susceptible to different weather patterns. And I know, further north, it seems like, Wisconsin, North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, it seems like the birds are a little bit more adapted to like that real cold weather. There was one winter where we had like sustained, North Dakota, South Dakota had sustained wind chills in the negative 60s for like 5-6 days. And I figured birds were going to be dead, and come that spring, it was like nothing had ever happened. So talking to people in Nebraska, they had a real bad cold snap a couple of years ago. And one of my buddies, he had like 12 turkeys die just from, they like got just cold. So I think depending on where they live, in the country, it seems like they're more adapted to different weather patterns.
Interesting. You were talking when we were talking about, broken habitat, but what makes good nesting habitat, and then if a person has a place or a piece of property they can manage, what things can they do to facilitate good nesting habitat?
Sure. So grasslands is a big deal. So you obviously have to have roost trees, right? So you have to have, big mature, whether it be oak, cottonwood, pine, big mature trees for roosting. But as far as nesting goes, you need to have good cover. So you need to have thick undergrowth, that real open floor. Old hardwood growth is not good nesting habitat. A lot of things are going to nest in like that fringe habitat. That is, tall grass, tall brush, real thick stuff that birds can get into and create a nest and lay on, where they're going to be protected from not only the elements, but from predators, stuff that's places that is going to be harder for predators to find them and eat the eggs or eat the bird or both.
Yeah. I hunt or have hunted historically in a fair amount of, like, I guess all types of turkey country in some ways, but definitely farm country, right? Mm-hmm. Where the agriculture is, from a food component, like a very big attractor / benefits the wild turkey. But I'd also wonder if that same, land that's good for agriculture would actually also be good for grass, for raising turkeys. So it's like on one end it's providing food, but on the other hand, like, it's getting taken up to, that could be potentially good nesting habitat.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course it is good food and good scratch ground and, all that kind of stuff, but it's definitely taking away from, what was once on the range natural grasslands. And a lot of that stuff that's industrial agricultural land now used to be trees, used to be whatever, depending on where in the country you're talking about. But yes, it does. There's kind of, like you said, it's two sides to that coin.
It's a yin yang, and yeah. And hopefully, my comment, right, like, I'm thinking like, well, on a podcast, that's what I do a lot of times. I just think out loud. But also, like, I don't even want to come off in any stretch of the imagination as like anti-agriculture. Like, we need less agriculture to make more turkeys, And I don't think you took it that way, but I don't want anybody else to take it that way, But it was just like a straight, like you said, there's a yin and yang to it. It provides on one end, but potentially, with we're just so efficient these days, with how we can do agriculture, that maybe it's not, as far as like nesting habitat, you're having less of that fringe stuff that you're talking about.
Right. Exactly. And that's not just affecting, the wild turkey, like the fact that, plows and everything's so much bigger, and with GPS and all the things, they're able to farm end to end. And so you do have less ditches, you have less, you have a less buffer area. And so, yeah, certainly not anti-agriculture. I mean, have family that is in agriculture. We all have friends that are in agriculture. I mean, I grew up in South Dakota, went to school in North Dakota State, which is an ag university. So have so much respect for people that work in the ag industry. So no, definitely not anti-agriculture, but it does take away some of that prime nesting habitat for turkeys, ducks, pheasants, you name it, everything. But yeah, there's so many factors in all of it. And I think what it really comes down to is figuring out how to, one, protect the habitat that we have left. And then two, improving the habitat that we have left and the acres of grasslands, woodlands, all of it, to the best of our ability. Because if we can produce more wildlife on the acres that we have available, I think that's better for everyone, including the wildlife.
For sure. What are some things that, like, might be, I mean, I'm guilty as charged, like, I've taken for granted, like, these, like, for a long time, these booming turkey populations. And I don't want to, it's not all negative either. Like, there's still a lot of stable, turkey populations. Turkey hunting is still, thriving. But I think as sportsmen, like, when we see, like, things happening, we want to get ahead of the curve, not be behind it and have a real problem on our hands for us, for the wild turkey, like, for the populations in general, right? But like, what are things that people can do on their property to enhance nesting habitat?
I would say plant grasses and thick cover. If you can have, like, dedicated, real thick places for birds to hide, I think that's a big one. trying to think. I mean, you can manage predators on your own property. I mean, that's going to be a big one. Like, and kind of like doing your part to like manage everything as a whole rather than just pinpointing one or another. What else can people do? I've seen someday I'll own my own piece of property that I can manage, but right now I've just been playing on the public. So.
Right. Exactly. I'm talking hypotheticals here myself. Yeah. I've seen some guys talking about doing like prescribed burns to, and I'm assuming that's just,
there's I forget his name, Kyle. He's the Native Plant Talk on TikTok, and he does like the Native Plant Habitat Project on Instagram. He is super fun to watch. And a lot of what he talks about in the prescribed burns for turkeys is what it does is you have invasive grass. It's an invasive species of plant life, and that'll take over. And if you do a prescribed burn, basically you can burn off that invasive species and the native species will come up and shade out the invasive species. So if you can burn it at the right time to allow the native grasses to come up, you're going to be a lot better off rather than having basically plants that don't benefit the wildlife. So I know NWTF has been making a big push on fires too, to have more prescribed burns and kind of burn off a lot of that invasive undergrowth as a way to allow those native plant species to come back up.
Gotcha. Yeah, like I said, that's something I've heard, but I didn't necessarily know the why behind it. So, and it makes a lot of sense, right? Yep. I imagine all those nutrients from the burn, they're going back into the ground and helping those native plants come up. So, kind of a full circle thing there. So you brought up the predator management side of things, which I guess as a outdoorsman, hunter, angler. I've probably said it on like 9 different podcasts. I keep wanting to get into trapping, and then I never take the initiative to get my trapper's ed so I can actually trap. But what's going on there? Because I always want to, and it sounds like to me, it's like, oh, this is another way that I can maybe extend my season, engage in an outdoor activity, interact with wildlife and wild places, but maybe do a few good things for the wild turkey. So what's going on there?
Yeah. So over the past few years, I mean, I didn't grow up a trapper at all. So it's just been the last couple of years that I've kind of started to dip my toe into it. And I want to preface it by saying, as I've done this, I feel like a kid that's just starting to hunt again. It has been so much fun to learn this new skill. And when you walk into the woods, you look at it completely differently than I used to. You start to have to look at all of the tiniest little details, which has been really fun. But yeah, so I started to watch guys like Dave Owens, the Pinhoti Project, Cameron, the Godfather was his handle for a while. He's been on a tear this year, but guys, the hunting public, everyone's been started to kind of talk about this, we're, save the poults. And so started to look into it a little bit, and ground nest predators is one of the major reasons that when you have a good population of birds, whether it be turkeys, ducks, pheasants, whatever, if you have a large population of ground nest predators, they wreak havoc on nests. And so started to look into a little bit more, for where I grew up, raccoons didn't really even exist on the Great Plains until the 1950s. So it's not like, birds of the past had to deal with, a lot of ground nest predators. So it's an easy way to get involved in the management. It's a really fun thing to do, late winter, super early spring, kind of leading up to nesting season for all these birds. And yeah, it's not an expensive thing to get into either. I mean, you just need to pick up a few traps and some marshmallows for bait. I busted out my stuff, but yeah, you can get into it relatively inexpensively and do a lot of good for wild bird populations.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up, ducks and turkeys there, but so what, these, predators like coons or other ones, but I think we're, primarily talking coons here, but what kind of impact, are they having? What are we seeing on the landscape as far as how they are impacting the wild turkeys?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the interesting things is raccoons do not hunt nests. They don't specifically go out and look for a nest. But what they will do is they basically wander in circles, right? And so if a turkey or a duck or whatever sets up a nest somewhere and a raccoon happens to wander by, they're always going to work downwind of cover. And so if they happen to wander by downwind of a nest and they smell it, they'll go directly to it and they'll eat all the eggs. They'll destroy it completely. So just some anecdotal evidence from a research project that I went and shot photos on. It was a duck nesting research study, but I think we can extrapolate that to the wild turkey. So there was, they had control fields where they were counting the number of nests, the number of nesting success. They had fields where they would do township trapping. So just like roadside trapping, basically trying to cover the entire area, trapping along, culverts, ditches, which is there's a lot of grasslands. So there's typically a lot of predators that move through there. And then they did hotspot trapping. So let's say you had a big township block, which is 23,000 acres, but there's only like 3,000 to 4,000 acres of prime like nesting habitat. So rather than doing a full township trapping, they would do hotspot trapping. And I was talking to Hunter Veldkamp, who was in charge of running the crew, just asking him like different numbers, like, okay, how successful is this field? And he's like, well, in the areas that we do hotspot trapping, we have seen up to 60 to 70% nesting success in those areas where we hotspot trap. And then in the places where they township trap, where they're still killing a lot of predators, it was somewhere, I'm going to get the number wrong, but it's probably like 20 to 30%, maybe up to 40% nesting success, where they were taking a lot of predators, but not like targeting them. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, well, what about the control field? And he was like, oh, 0. So even if ducks were forming a nest, it was basically 0% success rate on actually having a hatch, which like when I heard that, like just like blew my mind, like that predators could be that successful. Now, obviously this is related to ducks, but if you have like, one drainage where turkeys roost and whatever, or they're breeding, in your area, and like all of the predators are going to, basically key on that, and they're going to wait for birds to start dropping nests, and they're going to work downwind. And I don't know what the average number of eggs a season that a raccoon or a possum or whatever eats, but I would venture to say, didn't Mike Chambers say it was like 80% of maybe it was 40 to 60% of all nests get eaten before they even hatch. So they do lots and lots of damage.
I mean, those really are astounding figures, and then the nests that, do hatch or are considered successful. It's not like every egg in that clutch is making it either.
No. Yeah. I mean, even if they, right. Like exactly. Even if they do hatch, I don't remember the percentage of poults that even, make it through their first year. It's very, very low. Like the odds of, first having a successful nest being laid, then making it all the way to hatch, then making it through that first season. I mean, I don't know what the percentage is, one in thousands. I have no idea.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. And, like I said, we've been, privileged to see these wild turkeys flourish, now we're starting to see this kind of, some setbacks, if you will. But I definitely, after hearing some of these facts and figures and the science and the data, I look at turkeys differently now. Like when I see a turkey, I'm like, I've always thought they were special and neat, and I love hunting them and being where they live and interacting with them. But I look at them like, man, that is amazing. Like the odds of that adult gobbler or adult hen being alive, not that high. Like that's a very, very special thing for sure. And with that, so if a person is looking at like, okay, well, maybe I want to get into do a little bit of trapping here, and maybe, benefit, wild turkeys, engage in that activity. What's the best way to go about that? Like, what have you found in kind of your, I guess, journey into trapping?
Yeah. So the easiest traps to get into are the dog-proof traps. So there's several companies that make them, but basically it's just, I don't know if I'm trying to describe it the best I can. But it's just a cylinder with a spike on the bottom that you, and it has a trigger at the bottom. So you set the trap and then you put bait underneath that trigger. And when it's a really small hole, so dogs can't, if you're trapping in or near residential areas, you have less of an opportunity to catch somebody's pet, which is, a big deal. So, but yeah, it's a real small hole and there's a trigger at the bottom. And when they reach down to grab and they pull up on that trigger, basically it's a cuff, it basically holds their paw in there. And then you can go out and get rid of the raccoon or possum or whatever you catch in that trap. But they're super easy to use. They're very cost effective. They're like, I think they're $14. Like if you go to Shields or, if you buy a 6-pack, you can get 6-pack for $100 or whatever with a set tool and the whole thing. But yeah, if you get, pick up a 6-pack of traps, and then really the only bait that you need, I've heard everything from cat food to sardines to whatever, but the best that, everyone says marshmallows work. So you just use little mini marshmallows and put a few underneath the trigger. And, when I was first getting into it, I was filling the trap too full, and I was having, where a raccoon would come eat some of it, but not, or I'd have mice come steal all the bait or whatever. But, yeah, you don't need to fill it all the way full. And I've also heard people taking like one big marshmallow and they'll put it underneath the trigger. And so it's harder for the raccoon to pull up on it.
Gotcha.
And then put a couple mini marshmallows on top of that, give them a little bit of a teaser. And then when they reach back down, they pull up and get caught. But yeah, that's a very easy, cost-effective way to get into it. And they're very successful. And then you're going to want to set up, if you have a creek you can set up by, or shelter belts along cornfields or ag fields is a big one. Brush piles, old abandoned buildings, basically anything that looks like good raccoon habitat, which is, all of those things. Brush piles, if you can find cottonwoods or big stands of trees, where there's going to be den trees, anything in and around that is going to be good. Yeah. And just look for, if you can find, in the winter, if it's a lot of snow, it's harder to find, but as spring comes, if you can look in deer trails and game trails in the mud, you can find raccoon tracks pretty easy and set up along those. But
yeah, I'd have to imagine if a person also was, raccoons, they live a lot of places, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, if a person was thinking I want to trap with the intent on benefiting turkey nest production, keeping in mind where these turkeys are likely nesting and trapping, I guess in somewhat of a closer proximity to those places might have a gretter impact.
For sure. Yeah. It's kind of like taking that hotspot trapping idea from the duck research project and applying it to turkeys. If you have an area where you're like, oh, I know, 15 birds roost in this, oak tree or this cottonwood, if you can figure out travel routes, little game trails and stuff along, in that area where you're not going to be in there disturbing the turkeys every day. But if you can be in there, trying to pull some of those ground nest predators out of that area, you're going to start to make a big difference. Yeah. And it's the crazy thing about it is, I've talked to several conservation groups about trapping, and Delta waterfowl is very heavy on the trapping side. But if you talk to some other ones, they seem like, the scalability and the cost of trapping is a deterrent for the organization itself. So I think it's going to take, doing podcasts like this and talking about, how the general hunter needs to get involved in this to make a difference. It's going to take a culture shift now, because fur prices and everything have gone so far down. You don't have full-time trappers that are targeting raccoons. And so it's going to take, everyone to basically do their part. Yeah, I don't know if you want me to talk about my Earn-a-Gob idea or not, but
definitely. But you bring up a good point, with trapping is, as, fur prices have gone down for a variety of reasons, hopefully we see them come back someday. And there's always a little bit of ebb and flow there, depending on the market. But there's no monetary incentive for, a trapper to go through the work of trapping these animals and commit the resources to it for a return. It would be a losing proposition, as far as, on the money side of things. So, like you said, I think that leaves it up to, sportsmen like you and me, if I can get off my, what, and finally get my Trapper's Ed certificate. Maybe this will be the public, when I finally say it publicly again that I'm going to do it. But yeah, let's talk about that program. And then I've got a few other, trapping / hunting questions when it comes to coons as well. So,
well, let's stay on that line, and then we can get to the Earn-a-Gob later.
Cool. Well, so for instance, where I'm at right now, don't have my Trapper's Ed. Definitely interested in it, want to get into it, but I think we actually have a season here. It's going to close in February. I believe. So don't quote me on that. But you can hunt them too, and that can be really exciting and potentially have an impact on turkey poults. So what have you done on the hunt side of things?
So the hunting side of things actually is, to me, is more fun than the trapping as far as like the engagement with the animal. So if you have an e-collar, I use the Lucky Duck Revolt, and I have never seen an animal so angry at a sound like when it comes in. So some buddies of mine filmed a predator hunting TV show for The Grind. And so that's where I first learned about calling raccoons and how awesome it can be. And so I got a e-collar, and it was a March day or whatever. It's finally like warm enough to like go outside in North Dakota. And I called a buddy. I was like, hey man, you want to go try this call? Like I just came in the mail. Like, it's finally whatever, warm enough. Let's go give it a shot. So we drove down to a public area, and I was like, oh, there's some cottonwoods. So like we literally parked the truck, walked 50 yards, turned on the call. And it was probably, on raccoon stands, you typically do, if nothing's running in 5 to 7 minutes, like you can just move on to the next spot. But it was about the 4 to 5 minute mark. My buddy goes, oh, I think I just saw one. And this raccoon basically jumped out of a 100-foot cottonwood tree. I mean, just like sprinted down the side of it and then ran 200 yards and tackled the call. Like that was my first raccoon calling experience. And it, like after that, it's been, I've done quite a few sets now, but it's very high success rate. If you, go to places where you like, oh, that's probably a den tree, or there's a den tree in this area. But it is so much fun. Like I've had them do that. I've had them come ripping in and tackle the call. I've also had them come in, I've had 2 or 3 raccoons come in at a time where they're a little bit more cautious, but if you get the call out there with the little tail spinning on the top of it and, play the right sounds, just playing raccoon fight sounds. And man, if it is not hard to get them fired up and come sprinting in.
Gotcha. Well, when you're talking about like the numbers of coons you're encountering, the aggression, that they're not that hard to find, I think that also speaks to the number that are on the landscape, right? So,
yes. Yeah. I know Clay Newcomb, it is kind of jumping back to that number of raccoons. So like basically as agriculture has moved its way across the country, in places where they planted tree rows for soil erosion or whatever, which, basically planted raccoon habitat. Clay had a good stat. He was on the Rogan podcast, and he was talking about how in the hardwoods in the East, it used to be, it was like 1 to 2 raccoons per square mile. And as agriculture has come up, that number jumped. It's like 50 to 100 up to 50 raccoons per square mile in some areas, and even higher that in other areas. So like the population of raccoons has absolutely exploded over the last 75 years, which is, but there are a lot of raccoons out there.
Yeah, I mean, you think like anytime you drive down a country road at night, like not uncommon to see them, or even I've been out turkey hunting and calling turkeys and seen raccoons during daylight hours and things like that. Or as it starts to wane into the afternoon, you see them during deer season. I've had them climb up the tree next to me, come out of trees. Like there's definitely a lot out there, and in a lot of ways, really not a lot being taken off the landscape to help balance all these wildlife populations.
Right. Yeah. There was a study done, or at least a correlation done in Missouri between the number of raccoons registered through trapping, and then the number of poults that are per hen. And, back in the 70s and 80s, it was, there was 250 to 300,000 typically per year raccoons that were registered because fur prices were really high. And as that dropped off, basically it's like looks like a direct correlation between the number of raccoons that are being taken off the landscape and the number of poults. So like in the last couple of years, the number of poults per hen was 0.8 poults per hen, which is not sustainable. I mean, you're going backwards on that. So it's not as cut and dried as that, but it's pretty easy to see that they do have an impact.
For sure. And you're bringing up a state like Missouri where, heck, not that long ago, when you heard or somebody talked about like, oh, you want to go hunt eastern wild turkeys, like Missouri's the Mecca, right? Oh, that's the Mecca. I had buddies that would go hunt Missouri, and they'd be like, there's nothing like it, man. You get up in the morning, you just hear gobbles as far as you can hear on ridge tops. You got to hunt Missouri. And now you're like, to hear it described as that, or even just be that, and, showing indications that it's not like that and declining. And, you're talking about populations that aren't enough to replace, themselves. It's like a very, I guess, concrete indicator. And like, it's not just like anecdotal. It's like, which you do have that, right? I think that's extremely important, but it's like, no, we've done, people have done research, and we have, essentially a before and after, and you can see some strong correlations there.
Yeah. Especially like you said, in states like Missouri. I mean, we had this COVID boom of number of hunters in the woods, and the correlation between the number of hunters in the woods and hunter success, or like the number of turkeys that were killed in the state of Missouri, was so far off proportionally to what it had been in the past that it's, like obviously scientists and hunters alike are very worried about like the future of the bird in the state. So I think, but it's been very awesome to watch the sportsmen and women kind of rally around this and start to go, okay, like what do we need to do to protect this for future generations? Like what are the changes we need to make, and calling on changes? There's been a lot of stuff happening the last few years where people are like, oh, maybe this tactic isn't good to use, on public land. Maybe we can change, maybe we can shift this around or change, like we're willing to work with it and help. Like we're not just out there to kill everything we can.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, and if you looked at the people, I'd say who are initiating this, who are involved, who are talking about it, who are conducting the research, once again, and hopefully it becomes everybody. Like I'd love, like, you're talking about, some of Clay's messaging getting out on the Joe Rogan podcast. Fantastic. That's going to hit, such a wide demographic versus, or diverse, demographics versus, at times, as hunters, because that's who we are, but we can get caught in our own echo chamber, right? And you can definitely have an impact, but the more people that we get caring about things like this, the better.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. We need to kind of spread that message among hunters, and then, just tell your friends, tell your friends that might be on the fringe of just the outdoors. Like that's, we need to, we just need to keep spreading that message of this, looking at everything as a whole and not just hyper focusing on whatever you love to chase.
For sure. And like a person who might not understand trapping or the importance of trapping, what a great opportunity to explain to them. They might be like, I can't believe you're trapping, like, well, wait a minute, here's some of the why behind it. Let's look at the data. Like, oh my gosh, I didn't know all these things, so
exactly.
Definitely a great opportunity there. So Sam, you brought up your the program that you're trying to, get started there. Let's dive into that, because I like it. I love the idea.
So I was trying to come up with a way to, like, how do we encourage people to, really get into this? I'm a firm believer that it takes everybody being involved. So I'm going to implement it on myself. It's going to be Earn-a-Gobbler. So, if I'm planning on hunting a few states this spring or whatever, I am going to try to trap or call or whatever X number of raccoons or ground nest predators per bird that I'm planning on hunting. So, if for you that's 5, if for you that's 10, and for you that's 15, obviously a lot of times the more the better when it comes to ground nest predators. But so I think I'm going to try to do 10 ground nest predators per bird I plan to hunt this spring. So I've got some work to do. But it's going to be fun. Like, I think my skill set as a woodsman will continue to grow as I do this and start to learn different things about the landscape. And I'm fired up about it. I was actually going to go set traps before the podcast this morning. And then I was looking up the regulations, and you have to have a special use permit on conservation areas in Missouri. And so I need to call the manager of the conservation areas in this area and see what that entails. Otherwise, I need to go find some different land, core land or whatever, to go throw some traps up on. But yeah, I'm fired up. It's February. It's time to get after it.
For sure. And I think, you mentioned, the trap side of things. And I think if you are seeking permission on a piece of private, you may have to educate the landowner too. They might have pets or some things like that. Like, I don't want to have some traps out there. But like you said, they're dog-proof traps. They're called that for a reason. I've also heard them called coon cuffs, but that might put a person's mind at ease, and help them make the decision. Like, oh, yeah, here, go out there, have at her, and you might have to explain the why behind you're interested in doing it too, because they might love wild turkeys and say, whoa, geez, go get them all.
For sure. Yep. I think, honestly, I feel like you may have to do some education, but I do feel like trapping is a very good initial entrance into a relationship build with the landowner, because you're not asking to go chase big deer. You're not you're not trying to go kill a turkey. You're just, if you're trying to I just want to go spend time in the woods and make a difference. I think that leads to, you're going to meet a lot more people doing it that way and asking to, I just want to go call raccoons, or I want to go set a few, dog-proof traps. I think that will get you access to a lot of stuff that you might not have if you were like, hey, I saw a big deer in your field. You mind if I go set up a tree stand?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, some ancillary benefits potentially there as well. But yeah, whether you want to go out on public or private, or you have your own piece of private, man, yeah, I would definitely, and I'm talking to myself right now too, encourage folks to get out there, maybe learn how to trap if you haven't done that before, or, get yourself a good e-collar with some coon sounds on there, and get after it. So you said, and actually I'm going to back up here because I know you mentioned one sound, the coon fight. Is that your go-to then?
Yep. So the Lucky Duck Revolt has 3 different coon sounds. There's it's like Raccoon Fight 1, Raccoon Fight 2, and then Baby Raccoon. And so I just took there's a video called Raccoon Ruckus on there, and they talk about which sounds they use and what volume and whatever. And so I've just kind of used that tactic. And you start with Raccoon Fight 2, run that for a minute and a half, and then switch to Raccoon Fight 1, run that for a minute and a half, and then switch to Baby Raccoon. And if you've had nothing come in after 5-6 minutes, just pick up, run down the road, whatever, half mile to the next stand of big trees and do it again, or go find a brush pile or whatever. But yeah, and then you can run that thing on loud. I don't know what the volume goes up to, but I'm not running it at full volume, but you can make it super loud. And if anybody listening to this has ever been in the deer woods, if they're, deer hunting or whatever, and you've heard a raccoon fight, how loud that is. It might be 300 yards away and it sounds like it's right next to you when they're just getting after it. So you can, run the call loud.
Yeah, he talk about that coon fight, and I've got an e-collar with those sounds on it. But I have heard that. My buddy and I were actually turkey hunting, and I'd never heard anything I didn't know what it was, but it sounded like the most horrible thing. And we got up on them, and it was 3 coons just engaged in a big tussle that none of them made it out of.
Yeah, it is vicious. Yeah. I deer hunted Kansas a few years back, and I heard a raccoon fight every morning and evening that I was in the tree. So if that goes to show, tell you how many raccoons are out there. But yeah, it's a very vicious sounding thing. But man, when those big boars come barreling into the call, it's pretty cool.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. So I was trying to close it out. I thought we were closing out, and then I had a bunch of other questions. But man, whether you want to call them, whether you want to catch them, number one, you're gonna have another great time in the outdoors, and might save a wild turkey or two, and help some of these populations recover.
That's right.
Sam, appreciate the time, man. It's always good.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me on. I'll try to keep people updated on my raccoon journey this spring.
Yeah, for sure. I'll do the same, and yeah, keep me posted on that. And looking forward to catching up with you again sometime here soon.
Sounds good.
All right, man. Take care. Good luck out there.
There you have it, folks. Thank you very much for listening. As usual, give this video a like if you liked it, comment something below, and give us a subscribe to the Vortex Nation podcast channel. It would mean a lot to us. Also, why don't you give us a follow over on Instagram while you're at it, at Vortex Nation Podcast. We'd love to hear from you over there, and we'll keep you updated with all kinds of cool photos and videos from our adventures that we do here. Otherwise, we will see you on the next one. Thank you again. Happy hunting and shooting, everybody. Have a good one.